Hi guys, and welcome to Hillbilly Military Modeling. In this video we're going to be continuing our M-18 Hellcat by Academy project. This will be the interior painting, and we'll finish the construction of the hull on this vehicle. So the first thing we're going to do is disassemble it so that we can do our painting for the interior. So out comes our transmission and transaxle and the fighting compartment and the driver's compartment. Now we are going to paint the underside of the upper hull as well, especially our laterals and stuff, because that will be seen through the driver's hatch. So what we're going to do here is just go ahead and use some double stick tape. Also known as, this is the foamy type tape, the mounting tape. And I'm going to place that on these large craft sticks. And we'll just peel the film off of it there. And we'll be able to stick our driver's compartment here to it. So that it'll be so much easier to paint like this. We'll be able to get a good coat of paint on these parts by painting them separately, and it'll look much better. Now with everything prepped, it's time to get down to some painting, but first thing we're going to do is mix up this Vallejo white surface primer, and that's what we're going to be using. The instructions calls out for the interior to be white, also the transmission, but we're actually going to paint the transmission a different color. White gives us a good base for our weathering and chipping that's going to come a little bit later. When it comes to mixing paints, kind of the formula is about a 60-40 paint and reducer ratio. But for your specific airbrush and humidity and air pressure that you use, all those factors are going to determine exactly how thin or thick you're going to leave the paint. So I'm not going to try to tell you how you should do that. I'm still trying to figure it out myself. Sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't. So So we need to get a good coat of white on it and make sure that we get our laterals painted really well. Most of this is not going to be seen on the bottom side of the upper hull, but just in case, we've already got it painted up. And we'll paint our driver's compartment, floor, and seats. Now I do have to put a couple of coats of this on there because we are using white to cover up a rather dark plastic, this dark green. You can prime it with gray if you like, and you would use less white, and it would come out uniform more quickly, but it's not totally necessary if it's a white primer paint like we're using here. So I did take that white primer paint and add a little bit of black to it, just a couple of drops to change the tone of it. And like I think I said before, that the instructions calls for all the parts to be white, but I decided to have the transmission and steering differential a light shade of gray. That way it kind of stands out a little bit better against all the white that's going to be on the inside. Now when it comes to cleaning up certain items that have overspray on them, isopropyl alcohol works really good. This is 91% alcohol. And I'm just using a cotton bud here. And as you can see right here, this paint is completely dry, by the way. So you can see that it just really cuts right through the acrylic paint, right down to the plastic. And so what we're doing here is we're cleaning up the attachment points where we're going to be placing glue to glue in our deck plates and I'll also clean up all the areas where I intend to glue it when we mate the upper portion of the hull to the lower portion of the hull. Here I'm going to use the gray mixture that I sprayed the transmission and transaxle with, or not transaxle, but steering differential. And we're just going to brush that on to our air compressor. And that will give it a slightly lighter color, since we're painting it on over top of the white than, say, our transmission is going to be. Now we're going to use German Panzer Gray, and I'm going to use that just to paint these isolators for our compressor mounts. Insulators. I think they're isolators. Anyway, next up we're going to use this aged copper, and I'm going to thin that out just a little bit with some flow medium, because craft paints are really thick, and a lot of times you need to thin those out so that they brush on well. And we're just going to paint our air compressor's copper tubing up with this. And now we are going to attend to our seat cushions using XF49, which is to me a khaki, and we're just going to brush this on. Yeah, looks pretty good. Now it's going to be kind of hard to see, but I intend to have these hatches open on this vehicle so that our interior can be seen. Also, I use the German dark gray to paint the handles on our laterals and the little details on the instrument panel, as well as that pad. There's a cushion that's on the instrument panel too. That's painted with khaki. Now I'm going to use two colors here, this bright green and also this gray. Kind of need to thin it out, like I said, because of these being, even though they're good quality acrylics, they are craft paints and they're very thick. So they flow and paint much better if you thin them out. So I'm going to use the gray here just to do the fuel lines that are on the this bulkhead here. And of course I do make a little mistake that I have to clean up, but you know, it'll happen. I'm going to use the bright green to paint this fuel filter, just to add a little bit of color. Alright, I like it. Now we're going to take our enamel flat steel, which is my favorite for dry brushing, and this angled flat brush, which is my preferred brush for doing these deck plates. And we're just going to dry brush this flat enamel on. Now when it comes to dry brushing, make sure that you unload your brush as much as possible. You just want just a hint of paint left on there. So now I want to take some X20A and thin out a little bit of this X57 buff. And we're going to use a small piece of sponge. And we're going to put some wear onto the edges of our seat cushions. In my opinion, which is, you know, what it is. I think that buff is a good way to weather and show wear marks over khaki. As you can see here, just like buff and khaki, they just really go together well. And most of our cushions and pads and stuff in this vehicle are supposed to be khaki. So next up, we're going to take German Panzer Gray, and we're going to thin it a little bit with this reducer, and continue on with our sponge chipping technique. And we're just going to chip up the interior of the vehicle. transmission, just on the corners and areas of wear that's going to be inside the fighting compartment. Corners and edges are the most likely areas where things are going to hit and be drug across your paint and chipped. So we want to keep our chipping logical, and that's why we choose those types of areas. Now I do make a mistake here and put too much paint on the edge of that. I don't know if it's a fuel tank or whatever it is, but I'll come back in later and fix that. But your cocktail stick or toothpick, as we call it here, are really useful in making scratches. Now I'm going to use this antique gold to paint the brass on our stowed ammunition. I did mix it a little thin, so I have to apply 2 coats to cover it well. Now, I'm not really concerned about getting it all the way down against the flat surface of the sponson here. That'll be dressed up for us with the panel liner phase. Now we're going to mix up this metallic craft paint here, metallic charcoal gray, and we're going to paint the projectiles on our stowed ammunition here. And with all craft paint, you're going to need to thin those a little bit, otherwise it may come out a little bit clumpy, and you don't want that in your paint job. You want the paint job to be as even as you can possibly get it. Looks much more natural. I'm going to use this Tamiya thick cement here to glue our transmission down to the driver's section of the fighting compartment. And once we got that in place, we can go ahead and glue that down to the vehicle. A little bit of glue and press it in firmly, and you're ready to go. And now for our main fighting compartment. And this is the area right underneath the turret and turret basket. Now we'll just get that seated, pressed firmly into place. There we go. Looks pretty good. Now we're going to take this Tamiya X22 and our airbrush, and we're going to seal all of that. Once that's dry, we're going to use our panel liner. Now I use X22 in this project because it's a gloss clear coat, and it's going to seal our flat paint for us so that our panel liner is going to not wick out over the surface but stay in these little panel grooves. Once that's dry, the panel liner that is, we'll come back in with some Tester's thinner and just clean it up with a clean brush. You just want your brush slightly moistened, and we'll just clean up anything that we don't want to show on the finished model. Now, a lot of times it's good to walk away from your project after you do your first cleanup, and then come back again with a fresh set of eyes and re-inspect it and make sure you got everything. Now I do go back in with this X22 gloss clear, and we're going to seal in our black panel liner because we don't want it to mix with this next product from AK Interactive, Streaking Grime, which is what we're going to use to weather the floor plates in our vehicle. Now it is kind of thick, so I'm going to thin it out with this Tester's enamel thinner. It being an enamel based product, it's really easy to work with. So I've got it thinned out to about 50-50, and then I'm going to put my first coat on, and this is going to be the entire area that I intend to weather on the floor. So it's just a thin, grimy coat. And what I do is I let that dry, and then I come back in and I place a second coat right in the thick areas where I imagine would be the highest amount of traffic and probably the most grime that's being collected. And that actually gives us a color variation in our streaking grime that we're using here in the floor. And then we're going to come back over around the ammunition here on the sponsons and on certain flat areas and surfaces, just to dirty it up a little bit. So I do like to let this dry, and then I'll come in with a clean brush and a little bit of enamel thinner, and we'll just do a little bit of blending. And you know, when you're dirtying your vehicle up, it's all to taste. So once that all dries, I'm going to take this Model Master Acryl Flat Clear, and we're going to seal everything. So with that done, now it's time we can go ahead and join the upper portion of our hull to the lower portion. So I do have to use these clamps just to get the front of the vehicle aligned. So I just want to make sure that the corners are lined up. And once we get our clamps in place, we go ahead and just glue our upper section of the hull to the lower section. Now once the glue is finally completely dry, I come in and I sand it down right here on the front of the vehicle. The breastplate it's got that big overhang and it's not supposed to, so not a great fit, but we just sand that out. And next up is the attachment of all of our little parts all the way around the vehicle. I do leave these sprue gates attached to these small loops. Makes it easier to handle them. Not to mention that later we can just trim that off and sand it with the part glued in place and not have to worry about losing the part. As you all know, the carpet monster will grab those parts if you try to clean those small items up without them being secure. And then we go ahead and just glue up all of our pioneering tools and work on the front of the vehicle as well. Headlights and the horn and our guards here. No real issues with these parts. They can be just a little bit fiddly, especially the way the headlight guards are designed, but it goes together really well. There we go. Just make sure it's all lined up before you move on. Okay, so I've built up the periscopes in the driver hatches, and there's a small cover that goes on it. But you can see right here the sprue gate that I was talking about earlier that I've left on these little handle loops here. I'm just going to trim it off with my sprue cutters and Now we can come in and just polish it down. Of course, you know, I do wait till the glue is completely dry before we attempt this. We don't want to bend this part over. And there we are, construction part 2 complete. So we're going to leave the hatches off because we're going to paint them separately. We're going to have them in the open position. And we've managed to weather the interior, paint and weather the interior. I think we are moving right along with this project. So the next video is going to be the turret build, paint and weather on the interior of it as well. And you're not going to want to miss that video, so make sure that you guys stay tuned for that one. Now, if you're new to the channel and you're not a subscriber, then you should just go ahead and subscribe. It's free of charge, and hit that notification bell so that you'll receive a notification when I post a new video. And thank you to all my subscribers. It's because of you guys that I make these videos. And I hope you've enjoyed this one, and stay tuned for the next one. So I will see you in the next video. You guys stay safe.